My daughter called me staff at her own wedding and pretended we'd never met. Her rich in-laws mocked my outfit. I let them finish humiliating me, then I quietly took the microphone and made one announcement. Their faces went pale. My own daughter looked me straight in the eye and said, "Excuse me, but the staff entrance is in the back." I watched her face show not even a flicker of recognition as wedding guests turned to stare at the woman in the cheap dress from Target. The mother she'd just disowned in front of Boston's elite was holding a gift I'd spent 3 months saving for. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Standing there in that marble-floored country club, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart. That had been breaking slowly for 2 years. No, this was my last thread of hope snapping clean in half. You'd think after raising a child for 29 years, through sleepless nights and scraped knees and teenage heartbreak, you'd earn some basic recognition at her wedding. But here's the thing about rich people. They have a way of making you disappear while you're standing right in front of them. The woman next to Melissa, Bradley's mother, Patricia Thornton, actually laughed. A delicate little tinkle like expensive crystal breaking. "Oh, darling," she said to my daughter, "your staff really should know better than to use the front entrance." I looked down at my navy dress, the nicest thing I owned, bought specifically for this day. At 63, I'd learned to shop clearance racks and make every dollar stretch. 3 months of overtime at the insurance office had paid for that dress, the gift, and the gas to drive here from Hartford. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. I must have made a mistake. The security guard was already moving toward me. A kind-faced man in his 50s who probably had daughters of his own. "Ma'am, if you could just—" "Of course," I interrupted. "No scene. Not here. Not in front of these people who already thought I was nothing." I turned to leave, but not before I saw Melissa's face. For just 1 second, a shadow crossed her features. She knew exactly who I was. She knew, and she'd chosen to pretend otherwise. That's when I realized this wasn't a mistake or some confusion about my appearance. The story of how my daughter became a stranger starts 18 months earlier, when she brought Bradley Thornton home for the first time. I should have seen the warning signs then. But love makes you blind to a lot of things, especially a mother's love. "Mom, this is Bradley," Melissa had said, her voice different somehow, cooler, more careful, like she was auditioning for a part in a play I hadn't read the script for. Bradley was handsome in that expensive way, perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect handshake that lasted exactly 3 seconds. "Mrs. Williams," he'd said, "Melissa has told me so much about you." What he meant was, she'd told him enough to know I was a problem to be managed. I'd cooked all afternoon for that dinner. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans from my garden. The same meal I'd made for every birthday and celebration in Melissa's life. The same meal she used to beg for when she was 8 years old and homesick at summer camp. Bradley had picked at his food like he was afraid it might contaminate his trust fund. "This is very authentic," he'd said. That word. Authentic. Like I was some kind of museum exhibit. Melissa barely ate either, watching Bradley's reaction to everything. The chipped dinner plates I'd had since her childhood, the discount store tablecloth, the framed photos of our family trips to state parks and budget motels. "Mom still has that picture from when I was 10, she'd said, laughing in a way that sounded like an apology. "At the Grand Canyon." "How quaint," Patricia Thornton had replied when she'd visited a month later. She'd said it the same way you might say, "How tragic." That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it then. I thought I was watching my daughter fall in love. What I was actually watching was my daughter fall away from me, one perfectly manicured step at a time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the real moment I should have known I was losing her. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was grading insurance claims at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd helped Melissa with homework for 12 years, when her name lit up my phone screen. "Mom, we need to talk." Not "Hi, Mom," or "How was your day?" Just that flat, businesslike tone she'd been using more and more since Bradley entered the picture. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" There was a pause. I could hear voices in the background, expensive voices discussing wine vintages and stock portfolios. She was at the Thornton house again. "It's about the wedding planning. We've been thinking about the guest list and, well, some adjustments need to be made." Adjustments. I set down my pen and gave her my full attention. "What kind of adjustments?" "Nothing major," she said quickly. "It's just that Bradley's family has certain expectations about the tone of the event. Very formal, very traditional." I waited. 40 years of being a single mother teaches you when to push and when to let silence do the work. "The thing is, Mom, your friends from work in the neighborhood might not be comfortable in that environment. It's going to be very upscale, very different from what they're used to." There it was, the knife, sliding in smooth and clean. "I see. And what about your godmother, Linda? Your cousin Patty, who drove 12 hours to help us move you to college? This isn't personal?" "Mom, it's practical. We want everyone to feel comfortable." Comfortable. Like my family and friends were some kind of embarrassment that needed to be hidden away. "How many of my guests are we talking about removing, Melissa?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Well, we've reserved 3 seats for your side. You, Aunt Carol, and maybe Mrs. Patterson from next door, since she helped raise me. 3 seats. For the woman who'd raised her alone after her father died when she was 7. 3 seats for the family that had loved her unconditionally for 29 years. "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not really. You're upset. I'm processing." That night, I sat in my living room looking at the photo albums spread across my coffee table. Every birthday party I'd thrown with dollar store decorations and homemade cake. Every school play I'd attended alone while other parents sat in couples. Every sacrifice I'd made to give her a good life. But apparently, none of that was good enough for the Thorntons of Boston. Meeting the Thornton family in their natural habitat was like being dropped into a nature documentary about a species I'd only read about. Their Beacon Hill mansion, and yes, they called it a mansion, not a house, had more square footage than my entire neighborhood. Patricia Thornton greeted me at the door, wearing pearls the size of grapes and a smile that never reached her eyes. "Dorothy, how lovely to finally meet you properly." She said my name like it tasted of something she'd found stuck to her shoe. "Please call me Dot. Everyone does." "Oh, I couldn't possibly." Names have such importance, don't you think? They say so much about background. Bradley's father, Harrison Thornton III, because apparently being Harrison Thornton Thorwine and Tau wasn't impressive enough, barely looked up from his Wall Street Journal when we were introduced. The man had mastered the art of making you feel invisible while you were standing right in front of him. "Melissa tells us you work in insurance," Patricia said, as she led me through rooms that looked like museum displays. "How practical." The way she said practical made it sound like a communicable disease. "Claims adjustment," I clarified. "I help people rebuild their lives after disasters." "How noble," she murmured, steering me past oil paintings that probably cost more than my annual salary. The real fun started at dinner. They'd arranged the seating so I was between Bradley's great-aunt Constance, who was 90 and mostly deaf, and his cousin Trevor, who was 35 and mostly drunk. "So, Dorothy," Harrison said over the soup course, "Melissa mentioned you raised her alone. That must have been quite challenging." The word challenging hung in the air like smoke from a fire they were politely pretending not to smell. "It had its moments," I replied, "but we managed just fine." "Oh, I'm sure you did your best," Patricia added with that smile again. Single motherhood is so common these days, though of course children do benefit from having proper guidance. Trevor snorted into his wine. "Mother means money, Dorothy. Children benefit from having money." Even Melissa looked uncomfortable then. But she didn't say anything. That silence spoke louder than any words could have. "Fortunately," Harrison continued, "Bradley can provide the stability that's been lacking." That's when I understood. This wasn't just about money or social class. This was about erasing me entirely, replacing my 29 years of love and sacrifice with their version of what a proper family should look like. But they weren't done with me yet. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and drizzling, which seemed appropriate for what was about to become the worst day of my life. I'd woken up at 5 a.m. with stomach cramps that had nothing to do with the toast I couldn't force down. My navy dress hung on the closet door like a flag of surrender. 3 months of overtime for a dress that cost less than what Patricia probably spent on lunch. But it was clean, pressed, and dignified. It was the best I could do. The Brookfield Country Club was everything I'd expected. all marble columns and crystal chandeliers and staff who'd clearly been trained to spot people who didn't belong from 50 yards away. I parked my 12-year-old Honda between a Mercedes and a BMW, feeling like I was contaminating the parking lot. Inside, the lobby buzzed with pre-wedding energy. Women in designer dresses that cost more than my monthly rent kissed air near each other's cheeks. Men in $1,000 suits discussed golf handicaps and market portfolios. I stood near the gift table, clutching my present, a hand-carved jewelry box I'd found at an antique shop in Hartford. The wood was maple, warm and golden, with tiny roses carved into the lid. I'd spent weeks looking for something that felt special enough for my daughter's wedding day. "Oh my," I heard Patricia's voice before I saw her. She was talking to a cluster of women, her voice carrying just far enough for me to catch the words. "Such an interesting mix of guests today. Melissa has such a generous heart, including everyone." The way she said everyone made it clear exactly who she was talking about. I pretended to study the gift table, reading name tags on elaborately wrapped packages from Tiffany and Cartier. My antique jewelry box looked modest beside them, but it was chosen with love, which had to count for something. That's when Melissa appeared, floating down the marble staircase in her wedding dress like something from a fairy tale. She was beautiful, my baby girl all grown up, radiant with happiness. For a moment, my heart swelled with pride and love. This was my daughter, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep every night, the teenager I'd helped through heartbreak, the young woman I'd cheered through college graduation. Then she saw me, and that's when I watched my daughter's face go completely blank, like someone had just erased every memory of the woman who'd raised her, the woman who was about to pretend she'd never seen me before in her life. The transformation was subtle, but complete. I watched Melissa's posture change, her chin lifting slightly, her eyes sliding past me like I was part of the wallpaper. She'd been practicing this moment, I realized. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was calculated. "Melissa, darling." Patricia appeared at her side, air-kissing her new daughter-in-law. "You look absolutely radiant. Everyone is so excited to meet you." They moved through the crowd like royalty, accepting congratulations and compliments. I stayed by the gift table, still holding my present, watching my daughter charm people who wouldn't have given me the time of day. "Ma'am?" A young server appeared at my elbow. "The ceremony is about to begin. Would you like me to show you to your seat?" "Yes." "Please." She led me through the crowd, past clusters of Thornton family and friends, toward the back of the room. My seat was in the last row, behind a pillar that partially blocked the view of the altar. Row after row of Thorntons and their society friends filled the front section. 3 chairs in the back corner held the representation of my entire side of the family. Me, my sister Carol, who'd driven down from Vermont, and Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor who'd practically helped raise Melissa. "Well," Carol whispered as she sat down beside me, "this is cozy. Leave it to my sister to find humor in humiliation." She took in the scene with the sharp eye of a woman who'd spent 40 years teaching middle school. "Did you see the gift table?" she asked quietly. "There's a present there from the governor of Massachusetts." "Really? Really? Also one from some British lord whose name I can't pronounce." The string quartet began playing, and everyone stood as the processional started. Bridesmaids in matching pink dresses glided down the aisle, followed by the flower girl, Bradley's niece, a tiny blonde thing who scattered rose petals like she was blessing the ground. Then came Melissa, walking alone down the aisle. Her father had died when she was 7, and I'd always assumed I would walk her down the aisle, or at least that she'd walk alone in his memory. But apparently, Harrison Thornton III had offered to escort her, and she'd accepted. She'd chosen her new father-in-law over the mother who'd raised her alone. As she passed our row, I caught her eye for just a moment. There was something there, a flicker of recognition, maybe even regret. But it vanished so quickly I might have imagined it. The ceremony was beautiful and cold, full of readings about tradition and family legacy. When the minister asked if anyone objected to the marriage, a nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. I stayed silent, of course. But in that moment, I wondered what would happen if I stood up and said, "I object to my daughter pretending I don't exist." Instead, I watched her promise to love and honor a man whose family had just spent 6 months systematically erasing me from her life. And then they were married, and it was time for the reception. That's when the real humiliation began. The cocktail hour was where the Thornton family really showed their teeth. I'd barely entered the reception area when a woman in a silver dress and enough diamonds to fund a small country approached me with a smile that could freeze champagne. "You must be Dorothy," she said, though we'd never been introduced. Word travels fast in rich people circles, apparently. "I'm Vivian Ashworth, Patricia's sister. I understand you're helping with the service today?" Helping with the service. Not the mother of the bride. Not even a guest. The woman actually thought I was working the wedding. "Actually, I'm—" "Oh, wonderful," she interrupted, pressing an empty champagne flute into my hands. "Could you be a dear and get me another? The Dom Perignon, not the regular champagne. I can tell the difference." I stood there holding her glass like an idiot, while she fluttered away to rejoin her cluster of society friends. Around me, the reception hummed with laughter and conversation. Crystal glasses clinked. Designer heels clicked across marble floors, and nobody seemed to notice that the mother of the bride was being treated like the help. Well, almost nobody. "Ma'am," a real server approached me, confused. She was a college-aged girl with kind eyes and the harried look of someone working 3 jobs to pay for school. "Are you okay? You look a little lost." "Just finding my bearings," I replied, setting down the champagne flute on a nearby table decorated with white orchids that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The server glanced around nervously, checking to make sure her supervisor wasn't watching. "I don't mean to be rude, but my supervisor mentioned there might be some confusion about staff today. Are you supposed to be working this event?" Even the actual staff could tell I didn't belong with the guests. That's when the full scope of my daughter's betrayal hit me like a freight train carrying pure humiliation. She hadn't just excluded my friends and family from her wedding. She'd arranged for me to be mistaken for hired help. The woman I'd raised alone, put through college while working 2 jobs, loved unconditionally for 29 years, had orchestrated my public humiliation down to the smallest detail. "No, honey," I said gently, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm not working. I'm the bride's mother." The girl's eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Mrs. Thornton told us that all the family was seated at the head table, so when I saw you back here—" She trailed off, realizing she was making it worse. Mrs. Thornton. My daughter was already Mrs. Thornton, and she'd made sure everyone knew that the family worth acknowledging was sitting at the front of the room in their designer gowns and custom-tailored tuxedos. "It's not your fault," I assured the server. "Meaning it. Seems like there's been some miscommunication all around today." That was putting it mildly. What had happened today wasn't miscommunication. It was character assassination. That's when I saw Melissa across the room, laughing at something Bradley whispered in her ear. She looked radiant, happy, completely unburdened by the fact that she'd just erased the woman who'd given her life. Her dress probably cost more than I made in 6 months, and she wore it like armor against her past. But I'd been underestimating my daughter, apparently, because as I watched her navigate that crowd of sharks in designer clothing, I realized she'd been planning this humiliation for months. Every excluded friend, every reduced guest list, every calculated slight, it had all been building to this moment where I would stand in a corner, invisible and irrelevant, while she began her new life as someone who'd never had a mother at all. The worst part? She was good at it. My little girl, who used to cry when she accidentally stepped on ants, had become a master manipulator who could destroy someone's dignity without even blinking. But she'd forgotten one important thing about the woman who raised her. I didn't give up easily, and I'd been dealing with people who thought they were smarter than me for 40 years. Dinner was announced with the kind of fanfare usually reserved for royal coronations. The head table gleamed with gold-rimmed china and crystal that probably cost more than my car. Melissa sat there like a princess holding court, accepting congratulations from a parade of well-wishers who treated her like she'd just solved world hunger instead of marrying into money. I found my assigned seat at a small table tucked behind a massive potted palm in the far corner of the room, practically hidden from view. The location was so remote it might as well have had its own zip code. My table mates were an interesting mix of the discarded and the dismissed. The florist, the photographer's assistant, 2 elderly cousins who'd apparently been deemed too embarrassing for prime seating, and a +1 whose date had abandoned her for better company. "Well, this is cozy," Cousin Eleanor muttered, adjusting her hearing aid and squinting at the distance to the head table. "I haven't been stuck at the reject table since your Uncle Fred's second wedding. At least then they gave us dinner rolls." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was sitting with the people who'd actually contributed something meaningful to this wedding. Flowers that filled the room with beauty. Photos that would preserve memories. Decades of family history that apparently meant nothing to the bride. Meanwhile, the head table was full of people whose only contribution was their bank account balance and their ability to look down their noses at working-class people. Harrison Thornton III stood to make the first toast, tapping his crystal glass with a sterling silver knife that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His voice carried easily across the room, trained by years of boardroom presentations and country club speeches. Today we celebrate not just a marriage, but the joining of 2 families with shared values and traditions. Bradley and Melissa represent the best of what young people can achieve when they're raised with proper guidance and support. Shared values. I almost choked on my water. What values would those be? The importance of money over loyalty? The art of pretending inconvenient people don't exist? The belief that love can be purchased with the right wedding venue and enough champagne? Proper guidance. 29 years of single motherhood apparently didn't qualify as proper guidance. All those nights I'd stayed up helping with homework. All those soccer games I'd attended alone while other parents sat in couples. All those sacrifices I'd made to give her opportunities I'd never had. None of that counted as guidance in Harrison Thornton's world. The speech continued with platitudes about tradition and legacy, words that sounded pretty but meant nothing when you stripped away the fancy packaging. I watched the guests nod approvingly, sipping their expensive wine and mentally calculating the cost of the flower arrangements. The photographer moved between tables, capturing candid moments of joy and celebration. When she reached my table, she paused, checking her notes with a confused expression. "Excuse me, are you Dorothy Williams?" "Yes." "The bride's mother?" "That's right." She looked genuinely puzzled, glancing back at her notes and then toward the head table where the official family was seated. I was told by the wedding planner that there would be no family photos from the bride's side. Just the Thornton family portraits. No family photos. My daughter had made sure that her wedding album would contain no evidence that I'd ever existed. Future generations of Thorntons would flip through beautiful pictures of this day and never know that the bride had been raised by a woman who'd loved her enough to work 2 jobs and give up her own dreams so Melissa could have everything she wanted. "I see," I said calmly, though inside I felt something cold and sharp settling in my chest. "Well, perhaps you could take one quick photo of our table? For the record." The photographer smiled sympathetically and raised her camera. As the flash went off, I thought about all the photos that would be missing from this wedding. No mother-daughter getting ready shots. No tearful moments of a mother helping her daughter into her dress. No traditional family portraits showing 3 generations of women. No mother-daughter dance where I would have told her how proud I was of the woman she'd become. Melissa had choreographed my elimination so completely that future generations of Thorntons would never know she'd had a mother at all. In her version of history, she'd apparently been raised by wolves or spontaneously generated from pure ambition. But here's what my daughter didn't know about me. 40 years of adjusting insurance claims teaches you how to investigate things that don't add up. And something about this whole situation smelled like a cover-up that went way beyond social embarrassment. During the band's break, I excused myself to use the restroom and took a little detour past the club's business office. Call it professional curiosity, or maybe just the instincts of a woman who'd spent decades following paper trails that led to uncomfortable truths. The door was slightly ajar, probably left open during the chaos of coordinating the evening's events, and I could hear familiar voices inside having what sounded like a very private conversation. It's absolutely crucial that there's no connection visible to anyone looking from the outside, Harrison was saying, his voice tight with stress. The SEC investigation is still ongoing, and they're specifically looking for patterns in our social circle. My feet stopped moving. SEC investigation? I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding. "Daddy, you're being paranoid," I heard Bradley reply, though his voice carried less confidence than his words suggested. Nobody's going to trace anything back to the family trust. The shell companies are clean. The wedding guest list alone would raise questions if anyone looked closely enough, Harrison continued. That's why we needed to keep certain people away from this event. People with the wrong kind of professional background. My blood turned to ice water. This wasn't about social embarrassment or class differences. This was about something much bigger and much more dangerous. What about Dorothy? Patricia's voice was sharp with the kind of anxiety that comes from knowing you're in deep trouble. She could be a real problem if she starts asking the right questions. Her job makes her exactly the type of person we can't have sniffing around. She won't be a problem. Melissa's voice made my heart stop completely. Trust me, Mother. I know exactly how to handle her. She's so desperate for my approval that she'll believe whatever I tell her. Mother. My daughter was calling Patricia Thornton Mother with the same tone she'd once used for me, and she was talking about me like I was a stray dog that needed to be managed. Good, Harrison continued, his voice carrying the cold calculation of a man used to making problems disappear. The less she knows about Bradley's business arrangements, the better for everyone involved. A claims adjuster with her experience would recognize financial irregularities immediately if she saw the right documents. That's when the pieces clicked into place, like tumblers in a lock opening to reveal something ugly hidden inside. My profession wasn't just embarrassing to them, it was genuinely dangerous. I'd spent 20 years investigating insurance fraud, following complex paper trails, connecting dots that others missed, building cases that sent criminals to federal prison. And apparently, there were dots here that the Thornton family desperately didn't want connected by someone with my particular skill set. I slipped away from the door and returned to my table, my mind racing through possibilities and implications. What kind of SEC investigation involved wedding guest lists? What business arrangements required shell companies? And why was my daughter so confident she could manipulate me into staying quiet about whatever illegal activities her new family was involved in? The band returned from their break and announced the traditional father-daughter dance. Harrison walked Melissa onto the floor while the crowd watched approvingly, cameras flashing as they captured the touching moment. She looked up at him with the same adoring expression she used to reserve for me, back when I was the most important person in her world. As they swayed to the opening notes of My Girl, a song I used to sing to her when she was small and scared during thunderstorms, I realized that this wedding wasn't just about joining two families. It was about burying evidence of anything that might complicate the Thorntons' carefully constructed facade of respectability, including me. But they'd made one crucial mistake in their calculations. They'd assumed that a working-class woman from Hartford would be too intimidated by their wealth and power to fight back when she discovered their secrets. Clearly, they'd never met a woman who'd raised a daughter alone while working full-time and going to night school, who'd built a career investigating criminals who thought they were too smart to get caught. Time to show them what proper guidance really looked like. The moment I'd been waiting for came during the cake-cutting ceremony. While everyone's attention was focused on Melissa and Bradley performing their picture-perfect slice of 4-tiered vanilla fondant decorated with enough sugar flowers to supply a small garden, I quietly approached the band leader during a brief lull in the festivities. "Excuse me," I said politely, showing him my driver's license with the name Williams clearly visible next to my photo. "I'm Dorothy Williams, the bride's mother. I'd like to make a brief announcement after the cake ceremony, if that would be possible." He looked genuinely confused, probably because nobody had mentioned during the extensive planning meetings that the bride actually had a mother, but nodded with professional courtesy. "Of course, ma'am. Just give me your signal when you're ready." I returned to my corner table and watched my daughter feed cake to her new husband while cameras flashed from every angle. She was glowing with happiness, completely unaware that her perfect day was about to become very complicated. The innocence in her smile made my heart ache for just a moment. She looked so much like the little girl who used to help me bake cookies for her school fundraisers, carefully measuring flour and sneaking tastes of chocolate chips. But that little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who'd chosen money and status over the mother who'd sacrificed everything for her. You see, while they'd been busy congratulating themselves on their masterful deception and celebrating their successful exclusion of anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions, I'd been busy doing what I do best, investigating irregularities and building a case. During my little trip to the restroom and subsequent detour past the business office, I'd done more than just eavesdrop on their incriminating conversation. I'd also taken several clear photos with my phone, photos of documents that had been carelessly left on Harrison's mahogany desk. Insurance claims from 3 different companies, all bearing Bradley's signature in his distinctive handwriting. Claims for property damage from accidents that had happened at suspiciously convenient times, always just before major financial obligations came due. There was the boat fire that happened 2 days before Bradley's business loan payment was due. The car accident that totaled his BMW exactly when his credit card bills reached their maximum limits. The apartment flood that coincidentally occurred right before he needed money for Melissa's engagement ring. Each incident perfectly timed, each claim just large enough to cover his immediate financial needs. 20 years of fraud investigation teaches you to recognize patterns that innocent people would dismiss as bad luck. And Bradley Thornton had a very interesting pattern of expensive accidents that always seemed to solve his money problems at exactly the right moment. The SEC investigation Harrison mentioned? I'd bet my pension it was related to those convenient accidents and the complex web of shell companies they'd mentioned. And I'd bet my life savings that the Thorntons' sudden urgency to keep me away from their family gatherings had everything to do with my professional expertise in recognizing insurance fraud when I saw it. My daughter thought she was marrying into wealth and security, joining a family that would give her the sophisticated lifestyle she'd always craved. What she'd actually done was become an accessory to a federal crime, probably without even realizing it. But ignorance wouldn't protect her when the FBI finished their investigation. And it certainly wouldn't protect her from the consequences of humiliating the one person who might have been able to help her navigate the legal nightmare she'd just walked into. "Ladies and gentlemen," the band leader announced, tapping his microphone to get the crowd's attention. "We have a special request for the microphone from a member of the wedding party." The room quieted gradually as conversations died down and faces turned toward the small stage where the band had been playing. I walked slowly toward the center of the dance floor, feeling hundreds of eyes watching me with curiosity and growing concern. Some guests were probably wondering who this woman in the discount dress was and why she was interrupting their elegant celebration. Melissa's face went completely white as she finally realized who was holding the microphone. She grabbed Bradley's arm, her manicured nails digging into his expensive tuxedo sleeve. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate this beautiful wedding," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "I'm Dorothy Williams, and I'm Melissa's mother." A murmur ran through the crowd like a wave. Several Thorntons exchanged shocked glances. They'd apparently done such a thorough job of erasing me that some guests were genuinely surprised to learn the bride had a mother at all. I have something very important to share with everyone here tonight, especially my daughter and her new family. That's when I saw real fear flash across Harrison's face for the first time all evening. He started moving toward me, probably planning to take the microphone away, but it was too late. The truth was about to come out, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I've just learned some absolutely fascinating information about the Thornton family business practices, and I think everyone here deserves to know exactly what kind of people they're celebrating tonight. The room went dead silent. "You see," I continued, holding up my phone so everyone could see it clearly, "I happened to come across some very interesting insurance documents earlier this evening. Documents that show a remarkable pattern of accidents and claims, all tied to one particular person in this room." Bradley had gone gray as old newspaper, his face a mask of panic barely held in check. Patricia clutched Harrison's arm like she was drowning in quicksand. Several guests had started whispering among themselves, sensing that something very wrong was happening but not yet understanding the full scope of it. Now, I've spent 20 years investigating insurance fraud for a living, so I know what these patterns usually mean. Multiple claims filed over short periods of time. Perfect timing that coincides with financial pressures, accidents that happen to very expensive items right when someone needs quick cash. I paused, letting that information sink into the crowd of Boston's social elite. The kind of expensive items that people like the Thorntons own, and the kind of expenses that come with maintaining a Beacon Hill mansion, a Nantucket estate, and the lifestyle necessary to move in circles like this. The silence was so complete you could hear the ice melting in the abandoned champagne glasses scattered across white cloth tables. Even the catering staff had stopped moving, frozen in place by the tension that filled the elegant room like poisonous gas. "But here's what I found most interesting of all," I said, my voice warm as honey and twice as deadly. "These documents that I photographed tonight are currently under active SEC investigation for insurance fraud, which explains perfectly why my daughter was so eager to distance herself from a mother who might recognize financial fraud when she saw it spread across a desk." Melissa's face crumpled completely, not with shame or regret, but with the terror of someone who just realized they'd walked into a trap they never saw coming. She finally understood what she'd married into, and more importantly, what her betrayal of me had really cost her. "Bradley," Harrison hissed through clenched teeth, but I wasn't finished. Not even close. "Oh, but the absolute best part of this whole situation," I announced, turning to address the crowd of shocked faces staring back at me, "is that every single one of these fraudulent insurance claims was filed after Bradley proposed to my daughter, almost like he needed quick cash for a wedding that would cement his reputation in Boston society and provide the perfect cover for his family's ongoing criminal activities." The photographers, both hired and guest, were clicking away frantically now, capturing every horrified expression, every moment of this spectacular collapse of carefully constructed lies. Tomorrow's society pages were going to be very interesting reading. "So, I have a very special wedding gift for my daughter," I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Complete transparency about the family she's just legally tied herself to." I held up my phone again, making sure everyone could see it clearly. "I've already sent copies of these insurance fraud documents to the FBI, the SEC, and 3 major newspapers. Because that's what proper guidance actually looks like. Melissa, teaching your children to stand up to bullies and criminals even when they're wearing $1,000 suits and hiding behind old money and social connections." Harrison lunged toward me then, his composure finally cracking completely, but he was too late. The FBI agents who'd been quietly entering through the side doors of the country club reached him first, their badges glinting under the crystal chandeliers. "Harrison Thornton, you're under arrest for insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and money laundering," the lead agent announced, her voice cutting through the chaos that had erupted in the room. Guests screamed and scattered like startled birds. Cameras flashed from every direction as federal agents moved efficiently through the crowd, reading rights to half the head table, while wealthy socialites tried to figure out how to distance themselves from people they'd been toasting just minutes earlier. Melissa stood frozen in the middle of it all, still in her designer wedding dress, watching her new family being led away in handcuffs while her perfect day disintegrated around her like spun sugar in the rain. I walked over to where she stood and gently took her trembling hands in mine. "Honey," I said softly, my voice full of the love that 29 years couldn't erase, "when you're ready to come home to people who actually love you for who you are instead of what you can do for them, I'll be waiting." Then I picked up my purse, nodded to my sister Carol, who was watching the chaos with barely concealed satisfaction, and walked out of that country club with my head held high and my dignity intact. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be erased by people who think your love makes you weak, and sometimes it's making sure the truth comes out at exactly the moment when it will do the most damage to people who deserve everything they get. The next morning's headlines read, "Boston Society Wedding Becomes FBI Sting Operation. Prominent Family Arrested for $1 million Insurance Fraud." But the best part came 3 days later, a soft knock on my door. When I opened it, there was Melissa, still wearing her going-away outfit, tears streaming down her face. "Mom," she whispered, her voice broken with genuine remorse. "I'm so sorry for everything. Can I please come home?" I opened my arms, and my daughter fell into them like she was 7 years old again. Some bridges can be rebuilt if both people are willing to do the work. It just takes the right foundation of honesty, forgiveness, and love that doesn't come with conditions attached. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.